Warning. In this video, I'm working with sulfur near a flame, which is highly dangerous. When burned, sulfur releases sulfur dioxide gas, which can be deadly if inhaled in quantity. Treat sulfur dioxide with the same respect as you would chlorine gas, and never intentionally allow any quantity of sulfur to burn outside of a fume hood. In October 1663, the traveler and natural philosopher Balthazar de Montcogni met with the Burgermeister of Magdeburg to discuss the state of knowledge in Europe, as he had done with so many others in so many other countries. During their meeting, the Burgermeister showed Montcogni an experiment involving a torella, a small earth. In his diary, Montcogni recorded the experiment. He supposes that the earth continually attracts everything to itself, and to demonstrate, he has a globe of a demi-pied in diameter, made from what he tells me are 9 minerals. It is yellowish and like a highly polished cement, which being rubbed attracts small bits of paper, some plant leaves, and down feathers. And what is most pleasant, it attracts these feathers, then lets them fall, then draws them again, and lets them fall back. And so on continuously and without end. He shows again the effect of the attraction of the moon by the earth, and of the repulsion of the same by a smaller globe, of the same material, which leads this feather through the air at a fixed distance wherever he wishes, and the same side of the feather is always facing the globe. And no longer separating them, it remains there as if dead, and both join as one. He tells me that when he drives this feather near a lamplight, which he made, it never approaches so far as to be burned. On the contrary, it begins to join to the globe. Montcogni concludes the diary entry on a poetic note. Nous fûmes charmants et fîmes méchants chairs, et mots vivants et méchantes pierres. The Burgermeister was Otto von Guericke, the famed philosopher whose work in vacuum science and pneumatics was greatly renowned and often discussed. The experiment itself uses Guericke's Schwefelkugel, or sulfur globe, to demonstrate the mundane virtues, something like his own fundamental forces, which he believed were a capable model of the universe. It was not clear from my research when or how Guericke actually developed the sulfur globe experiment, but it was not published until almost 10 years after his meeting with Montcogni in early 1672. This was the Experimenta Nova, ut vocantur Magdeburgica de vacuo spatio, a landmark text in early European science which discussed Guericke's experiments as well as his theory of mundane virtues. The Magdeburg experiments raised the question, how did Guericke come up with this series of experiments using, of all things, a globe of sulfur? And the truth is, we don't know how, why, or exactly when he designed this apparatus and first discovered the behaviors that Montcogni describes. The best we can do is to reproduce the experiments and see if their nature becomes more clear. How does one go about making a sulfur ball? Well, we could start by trying to make a sulfur cake using this toaster oven, watching carefully to make sure the sulfur never gets too hot. After about 30 minutes, the sulfur reaches a little above the boiling temperature of water and becomes liquid. Once it refreezes, it forms a somewhat brittle but beautifully crystallized platter. So melting the sulfur won't be an issue. Let's make a globe. For a glass globe, I used hollowed light bulbs, one 3 inches and another 5 inches in diameter. Then I used a torch flame to slowly and carefully melt the sulfur before letting it freeze. What Guericke actually said is, if one should so desire, take a glass sphere, a so-called phial, about the size of a baby's head. Fill it with sulfur crushed in a mortar and liquefy it with a flame. Break the cooled sphere and extract the globe, and keep it in a cool, dry place. If you wish, bore a hole so that it may move about an iron rod or an axle, and thus is prepared the globe. My first attempt at making the globe was generally successful, giving a robust and weighty ball. But after I tried to make some modifications to the axle, it broke into pieces. On the bright side, it gives a nice view of the internal crystalline structure. So at this point, it was time to go to the mortar and pestle and regrind the sulfur for the next attempt. The next globe would be 5 inches in diameter. It required quite a lot of sulfur, so I used a toaster oven to gently heat the sulfur and melt it over a period of a couple hours. The volume reduced dramatically as the sulfur liquefied, requiring multiple refills, which slowed things down a lot, but it was really satisfying to see the powder gradually turn to liquid. After I let it cool overnight, it was time to extract the globe. I think I left too much of the light bulb's coating on the inside, and it negatively affected the surface finish. In the end, I had to sand the globe smooth with 400 grit sandpaper to remove what I could of the surface defects. Once again, the globe gives us a linear crystallized design and a glassy shell containing the volume. If I were to do this again, I would absolutely avoid melting the sulfur inside the globe and would instead melt it separately and pour it in, and possibly try to create a coating instead of a solid mass. Later experimenters in electricity who used sulfur would follow this sort of approach, but the way you're seeing is how it was described by Otto. The original handle was only for temporary handling, so I cut it off and bored a new hole 3/4 inch in diameter for a larger handle, but I had to be very careful here as the pressure fit of the handle ended up causing a fracture that almost ruined the globe. In the end, I had a sulfur globe, which is quite similar to what Guericke originally used. It does smell like sulfur because the reaction with oils on the skin, so I keep it in a kitty litter box with a small amount of litter in the bottom, and I keep it closed shut. In the original drawings, the globe is shown large, and in some references the ball is cited to be 1.5 feet in diameter. But this seems unlikely since a ball that size would weigh tens of pounds, like having several heavy bowling balls on a stick. So now what? Does the globe build up a static charge? Does it electrify? The answer is yes. I rubbed the sulfur ball with a wool cloth for 5 seconds, and it immediately attracted the pith ball. The experiment, like all electrical experiments of this sort, is best performed when the humidity is less than 50%. If it rises above 60%, hardly any amount of rubbing will bring the ball to electrification. When the humidity is sufficiently low, say 40%, you can even hear a zap, and in the dark, you can even see the spark. Now, our goal here is to take what Guericke wrote in 1672 and reproduce it to verify his results. There are 8 sections in the brief chapter where he describes the globe experiments. We've just seen the luminiferous virtue, that is, the visible spark, and the sonic virtue, the sound of that spark. With the down feather, we can show how the globe's sphere of influence causes the feather's branches to spread out. It is quickly drawn to any nearby object, like a hand. Until finally, under the right conditions and a sufficiently light feather, it releases from the globe. It's a challenge to keep it in position above the globe, but it feels like magic to be able to push it around. The feathers seem as if they're alive, interacting with us, reaching out to try and touch us. To show the conservative virtue, Guericke says to rotate the globe about its axle and to throw paper leaf, wood shavings, and other fine materials below it, and then rub the globe with the dry palm for 2 or 3 revolutions and see it attract the materials below. That much we have seen, and there are even more accurate reproductions of the experiments available on YouTube, which I'll link in the description. In Guericke's letters to other German scholars of the day, like Gottfried Leibniz, He gives more details about how best to bring out the mundane virtues. He says that some hands, like that of his son, which are less calloused, will not work. If your hands are wet, the globe won't attract either. And further, you must store it in as dry a place as possible. And if you perform the experiment on a cool, dry evening, your chances of success are much increased. It was apparently Leibniz who first brought out sparks from the globe, and he also did some popularizing of Guericke's work to people such as Pierre de Carcavie and Henry Oldenburg. Clearly, Leibniz was aware of the importance of the globe. In a letter, he writes, "If the gentleman had never invented or discovered anything other than the ball of wondrous physical activity for the enlightenment of science, and the exhaustion of air for the increase of man's powers, he would have served the human race satisfactorily." You can find rough translations of their exchange of letters on my website, including Guericke's opinions on the nature of a vacuum, and Leibniz's advice that care must be taken in all things to not use values in the manner of scholastics which cannot be interpreted or understood. He evidently did not have the same appreciation of the mundane virtues as Guericke. The experimenta nova was well known in learned circles, and inspired natural philosophers such as Christian Huygens to repeat the experiments. Huygens came the closest to extending the results beyond the experimenta nova, but despite the promising start, nobody took Guericke's work seriously enough to make much progress, and interest soon died out. When the study of electricity was seriously picked up again, a new century had already begun, and results of the past century would have to be rediscovered.